will now please join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. We'll get right into it with old business. Mr. City Manager, is there any old business?
No, sir.
Okay. Consent agenda. Is there anybody who'd like to remove any of the items from the consent agenda? Anybody on the council? Remove the items from the consent agenda? Seeing none, is there anybody from the public who'd like to comment on items 2 through 10 of the consent agenda this evening? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public period and motion will be in order.
Motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Laura, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Wurzel.
Aye.
Councilmember Wild.
Aye.
Mayor Lund.
Aye. Okay, it is approved. Our quorum this evening of 3. Decisions. We have, as the first item, is the decision on a waterfront structure permit. I'm sorry, I'm skipping right over the public hearing. Is there anybody who would like to address the council this evening during the public period? It's a moment where anybody can speak on anything that the spirit moves them. We'll open up the podium. Seeing none, we'll close the public period. And now we'll get into decisions. The waterfront structure permit appeal 604 Minnehaha Lane. Dan's going to just introduce the item for us.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. So a little bit of background on this one. Back in 2023, June 21st, AJA Docs representing the property owners, Mr. and Mrs. Wu, who are in the audience tonight, applied for a permit to reconstruct an existing boat dock that was built back in the mid-90s that was destroyed during a hurricane. They wanted to build it back in the same exact footprint. On November 6th, staff notified the property owners that their waterfront structure permit application was non-compliant with the Land Development Code because it did not meet the side setback, the 10-foot required side setback. So on November 15th, Mr. Siegfried, representing the property owners, filed a written notice of appeal consistent with the Land Development Code. Now, the property is located on a regularly shaped lot on Lake Minnehaha, and the dock is not out of character with other docks in the area. Letters were sent out to the adjacent property owners following the appeal, and no objections were received from adjacent property owners. So this is a close-up of the property itself. The Wu's property is this one with the blue tarp in this photo. As you can see, the dock crosses the property line, which is not inconsistent with area docks in the property, or docks in the area. So tonight, council has a decision to either affirm the reviewing staff decision of denying the permit, reversing the reviewing decision, and approve the permit subject to them attaining an easement from the adjacent property owner, or modify the decision of the reviewing staff. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Does anybody have any questions of Dan on this item?
I have questions, but they might be more Cliff questions, so I don't know if we want to wait or.
Yeah, we can wait on that. And is that anything?
Not at the moment yet.
Okay. Would the applicant like to present the appeal? Or have anything to say, or would you like to?
Yep, so I'm Ray Wu. I'm the...
Go ahead, step up to that.
Get to a microphone, that'll be helpful for us there.
Where's the microphone at?
Oh, good.
Thank you. So I'm Ray Wu. I'm one of the homeowners, my wife Kayleen. We've been working with our neighbor, Howard and Jolene Shipnecker, to try to obtain a satisfactory resolution for the encroachment on the property. So we agreed on an easement whereby he allows us to replace our dock in his property in exchange for the easement. We'll also provide insurance, additional insurance for a property under his, for his party. So we did that and submitted that for your review.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wu. Would anybody from the public have any comment about this item?
council, mayor, Cliff, see you all. I am the neighbor to the north. We've been neighbors with them for a number of years, and
Mr. Chief Director, can I stop you real quick? Just, we all know you, but for the
Howard
record.
Schiffer-Decker, 606 Minnehaha Lane,
Yes.
Maitland.
Thank you.
Sure. Anyway, we have an easement that we've agreed to, so that we're allowing, them to have an easement on our property, which is in the water, by the way. It's not on, the dock is partially, it's weird because our property comes to the water and then takes a right angle and goes down. That's what the problem is, because we're on an area where it's, where some of the lands, some of the lots are just, they're crooked as far as once it gets on the water. So that's the problem. So that created a problem where the old dock was also on our property in the water. I don't know if you can see it or not. Here. There. That's the one. Yeah, it's there. There's up there. See the dock? That's where it was now. It's all busted up because of the hurricane, right there. And our property is here, and this is our property here, and the dock is in that. So basically, they have moved it, I think, some to the south, so you don't have the problem with the setback. They've taken care of that with the new design, and we've agreed, to give them the easement so they can have their dock. I mean, to me, any waterfront property should be able to have a dock. So we were very supportive of their situation. And I guess when the first dock was built way back, they didn't check on things like that at the time. So we are very much in support of it. We already have the easement done. It's ready to be reviewed. I think that Dan did look at it, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, Drew also looked at it and thought it was okay. Now, I don't know if I should say that or not, but he's seen it. Drew has seen it, and he was okay with the easement the way it was written and done. So we're just asking that they are able to build their dock for their property. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schiefer-Decker. Would anybody else like to discuss this item? Okay, let's close the public period. And Lori, we have a question for...
I actually do have a Dan question in light of the property owner's statement. I see the recommendation of staff, and there was a caveat, like the encroachment be dealt with, presumably what the homeowner's testifying about is relevant to that. Given that, would that change if we were procedurally backwards, the staff's approval of this? Had the easement already been established at the time of the application?
Well, because it didn't have a 10-foot setback, we would have denied it right off the bat. So with the appeal having that easement, that does make it something that should you do reverse our decision and approve it, it would require to have that easement, so they could put a dock on someone else's property.
So the setback is actually the issue in terms of your
Well, the way the property is that, as you saw, I can get back to that slide, they really curve inward. So the property line goes like this, and it comes straight down. So putting a dock anywhere on here, unless you're going straight down, it's going to likely cross the property line just in these lots right in here. As you can see, the adjacent neighbors both have the same issue here, where not the adjacent neighbors, but the two to the south have the same issue because of the shape of the lot. They go onto the encroaching properties as well.
And the reason I'm asking, and this piggybacks to my legal question for Cliff, I have no practical issue with this. I don't see anything in the Land Development Code that gives us authority to reverse or modify the decision of staff absent some sort of error in their interpretation or decision making.
Well, I don't think you're wrong, but the issue that I have is, if I understood Dan just now, what he said was they didn't have the easement at the time they reviewed it, so it's like they didn't have the information that we have. One of the things that is typical of an appeal is that you base the decision on the record that was before the people who made the decision. And so if you denied the appeal because of the fact that you have information that they didn't, I don't know what happened. That's the real, would that mean you deny the appeal, then it goes back and they say, now, we got an easement, now staff, it's back in your lap? That's the irony. I don't know that that would have been the intention, so I understand why the question is what it is. But since they have said to us, essentially, we have this evidence, I would treat it mentally, where I'm at is, it's more like a motion for a new trial based on newly found evidence that wasn't provided to the trier of fact.
Well, that's what I was asking, but then I thought maybe it was misunderstood when I asked Dan if you had had that information at the time of the decision, would that have changed the decision? And he said no.
And I think I misunderstood, I'm
Okay.
sorry, but yeah, it would have made a difference.
Okay, that's why I asked that.
Okay.
Because I was thinking of newly discovered evidence, so.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, and so if I understand it correctly now, this would change it there, and so we can change it, should be able to change it here with that theory.
Okay, because I mean, as long as everybody, obviously I don't know what my other council members think about it. My concern usually with procedural things, other than just being a fun stickler for those things, is setting precedent for just doing things willy-nilly. Even when they make sense in a particular circumstances, they certainly do here. But I think if there's new developments that basically the practical result of denying it would be for it to go back to y'all, only for you to spend a lot of extra effort for you guys to just do the same thing we can do. I don't have a problem with it, but I just wanted to make sure procedurally that made sense.
Is that true? Is that true? I mean, do we actually, I mean, is that true that we can actually, I mean, as an appeal, is that what you're following?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the land development code. It says appeals to city council review standards. Well, first of all, it says that the appeals letter has to specifically, I mean, it's all sort of appellate procedure,
Right.
but it says that the appeal letter has to specifically state what the grounds for appeal are, what the error being challenged is, and that we are supposed to limit our review to those errors. And then we have to specifically state in the record that there's competent substantial evidence of some sort of error or misinterpretation, so.
Well, and that's the problem. There's not really, if I, again, based on the facts as were presented from the podium and in the materials, it didn't sound like staff made a mistake. And so I'm not sure that appeal is the right vehicle, but I'm also concerned, and this is the part that I haven't had a chance to discuss with Mr. Mathis, maybe he'll tell us, is, okay, how do they get back to staff? If the results would be different now, do they file something new, or how does it get resolved? Because here's what the answer is that I'm trying to avoid. You're right, we agree, but you're gonna have to go to circuit court. So that's the problem, and I don't really know. If there's a way to get it back to staff, then I would agree with you based on the code. This is not really an appeal, because based on the evidence that was before them, which is all we're supposed to look at, we can't really change the decision, and the easement is a new development, but it's not for us. It's for them, because appeals courts don't review new evidence. They send it back to trials courts to fix. And I don't know if there's a process for that. Is there a way for them that, could they have brought it to you and said, hey, we got an easement now, are we good?
No, sir, there's not. This is a setback issue. Regardless of whether they had an easement or not,
Right.
staff couldn't adjust the setback because it doesn't meet the 10-foot setback. It's actually over the line. The easement takes care of that. That's why the appeal's here. So you have the authority as city council, because there are no specific criteria. Under the waterfront structures permit section of the code, under the code of ordinances, these decisions are at the discretion of the city council. So you can overrule staff based upon evidence that's provided by the homeowners. It's almost like a get out of jail free card.
That's the section I'm looking at, I don't see that. So I saw that it said that in the staff report, but that's my concern, I'm looking at it.
You got 2.5.3D.
Yeah.
To me, this this doesn't even address a setback issue, because it doesn't, it's just working around the setback. I mean, it's just, it's not, doesn't fix the issue, or doesn't even attempt to fix the issue, just sort of gives an alternative way to do it.
And I totally understand that there might be an issue with the application of the code here, but certainly not anything towards the homeowner or anything like that. But if we're in a quasi judicial proceeding, that's my concern, is being judicial, quasi.
So is the question, so the setback is one thing, but we're clearly blowing through the setback. That's not the
Yeah.
issue. We're actually getting an interest in property on the adjoining property owner's lot. So if you have that, you know, if anybody has that, and everybody wants to put a shed in their backyard or whatever, and they go to their next door neighbor in the subdivision and say, can I get a 20 by 20 foot easement, that doesn't solve my setback issue. Can you issue a permit in that instance?
Not if they're violating the setback. In this case, so this was a non-conforming structure because it was built back in the 90s. It clearly went across the property line within the setback, so we denied it for that reason. And again, because there is not really any strict criteria for council to reverse staff's decision, the easement would be something that we would have to have should you guys approve it, because it had to build on someone else's property. You have to have that easement. You're basically reversing the setback criteria that staff denied it for.
I know, so I saw it as us giving, I thought this was giving a permit for someone to build a structure within the easement. Because the easement is technically, I mean, the property is still the sheep protector's property.
Yeah, what basically we have here is the property owner who would be entitled to assert the setback as a reason to deny if we had been, or the staff had been considering granting, said, no, you're violating setback, that would have been the sheep protectors to assert. And what they're saying is, we're okay with it. In fact, we'll even give them an easement. So, but that is still, I think from staff point, that is not what the code permits. It avoids the issue, at least as to the sheep protectors and to whoever succeeds them on a go-forward basis, because the property owner would say, yeah, I've got an easement for it, so it might violate setbacks, but the property owner isn't going to complain. Who is? And the only answer to that question that I'm aware of is us, the city. The requirements that we have setbacks for, when we put the dock ordinance in, it really goes back to my very first case with the city was the Lake Jackson problem, where the lake was a right angle. And we had one dock this way and one dock wanted to go that way, and they conflicted. And that was the first time we'd ever taken into consideration things like riparian rights and setbacks and all the other stuff. We just basically said, if you have waterfront property, similar to what Mr. Sheepherdecker said, well, you should be able to have a dock. Well, that's not always the case based on the real consideration of some lakes and property lines like that. And so, there's kind of a holistic look at it as opposed to the code, which is, are we achieving the goal we set out to achieve, which is to make sure that property rights for everybody that needs to be impacted or is going to be impacted are being considered. They were. It was denied. It should have been. The property owners have solved the problem amongst themselves. Does it solve the problem for us? That's kind of the 30,000-foot view of where we are.
But it's not building in a setback that's the problem. It's building in a setback, but it's also building in someone else's property, technically.
Right. And that's why they have to agree, and they've done that with the easement.
I mean, I think that what technically we're being asked to do is override an ordinance for the land development code, and not to correct an error, which is not really what we're authorized to do, it seems to me. That being said, it sounds like the interested parties are all present. Anybody who would appeal what we did here is present, I assume would not likely
It would be
appeal
us.
this. And I understand, I've certainly been present and asked other bodies to do things in the interest of equity on that similar basis. And like I said, I think there is a concern sometimes about precedent when we're just doing things because they don't make sense. But I do think that there are reasons here given the purpose, the legislative intent as Cliff is laying out for us of these particular things, so.
So, I think you're one of lawyers, but if this went back to, are we saying that if this went back to your department and you had the easement, you still couldn't grant it?
If you are reversing our decision, then we would grant it based on your action tonight.
That's a different question.
But if we didn't,
If it was a brand new application and it went over the setback line, yeah, we would deny it for the setbacks.
Even with the easement.
Even with
Even with the easement, but
Because
because.
they, again, they're saying, understandably, the code says this. It doesn't say it's okay to violate if you have an easement. If it said that, we wouldn't be sitting here. It doesn't say that. And the thought was, but this is what I got based on what I heard from Mr. Eckington and as well as Dan, is that by bringing it here, we could use discretion. But we have some of the same problems because of the procedural way appeals are supposed to be handled legally. But again, if you then, okay, what are the alternatives and what is the purpose? And I think if we're really trying to get around to how did we get there, I just happened to be here when we drafted this thing, so I know what the thought process was, and I know what came out of it. And if the property owners themselves have a solution, that is a go-forward solution, because the easement is, it will bind not only Mr. Schieferdecker, but it'll bind his future property owners as well, so there's not a possibility that he sells it and they try to revoke the easement, therefore turn it back into a non-conforming nightmare. Then the legal reasons we have an interest, i.e. to protect riparian rights and littoral rights and the ability to wharf out into the middle of the lake, all those things are protected based on what we see here. Would it be better on a go-forward basis to put something in the code to allow this by virtue of a change and add, unless the property owners can consent through an easement and bind, something like that nature? But I think that's why the easement was suggested. The idea was that, well, this might solve the problem. But it still doesn't change the way the code reads, and that's where we are.
So, looking at the, like you mentioned, the 30,000 foot kind of view of this, and looking at that picture, it's probably more like 5,000 foot view.
Yeah, I'm a little high.
But you can look at that picture and say, there's really no other way that dock can be constructed, because if the dock is constructed along the property lines, the Wu's property lines there, it certainly would just go right across the front of their neighbors. It would just cut off their view, cut off their, in fact, it might cut off the existing dock there. I don't know if you all gave an easement to get that. It looks like somebody built a dock across your property. But there's really, I guess my point is, there's just no other way to build that dock, and it kind of makes sense from the way that the houses all address the lake there. I mean, they kind of line up and point their docks out. And if that dock has been there in the 90s, it's been there for 30 years or so, I don't see a problem with continuing it. Our problem, as I understand it, we have the ordinances and the way it is.
And when we have a law firm on council.
Yeah. So, I want to say, I understand, it seems to make intuitive sense that this could be overcome, but I think, my colleagues up here and I, and the city attorney and city manager, have to take very seriously the ordinance as it's drafted and how we deal with this.
So is it within our jurisdiction to reverse it and remand it? I mean, I don't know what the right.
Well, if you reverse it, one of the things that you're supposed to say is what is the grounds. And you could say, for the consideration of new information such as the easement.
Right.
But what we're getting an advanced preview from the man who knows, who's standing right there at the podium, the setback's still a setback, and the easement doesn't change that. And right now, there's nothing in the code that would allow him to say, unless there's an easement.
Right. So where I was going is, can you reverse it with a direction to that, that if staff found the easement to be satisfactory, they could issue the permit based on the completion of an easement that allowed for the construction of the dock in an adjacent property?
To the point, I think the answer is yes, you could do that. I don't like to ever be dishonest, so I'm going to say that it would stand on spindly legs, but perhaps a way to shore up those legs is with a direction to come back with a code amendment that would solve this issue on a go-forward basis that could be applied to this thing retroactively also, which is essentially, to put in that unless and the property owners agree on an easement that satisfies essentially that 5,000 foot level view, which is what we're trying to accomplish, which is not, as property owners not being in conflict.
Because the easement would have to say that they could build it there, and then if the current property owner who's granting the easement, the grantor would have to say that there's got to be some setbacks between docks, right? So we've got to establish that if I grant somebody an easement to come in, that then there'd have to be some provision for the fact that then the neighboring or dock that would be on that person's property would have to meet something. We can't just let this thing go crazy.
Right, well, the easement that was drafted and actually reviewed by staff, it was very specific to the area that the proposed dock, with the existing dock, because they're just reconstructing the existing dock that was damaged. The dock's been there. So the easement that's been drafted just covers that spot where it goes over the property line. It's not free-willing through the property itself.
So, but lot owner A grants an easement to lot owner B to come in and build whatever, right? Then lot owner A, who's burdened by the easement, comes in and says, I want to build something, and they want to build right up next to it. So is there, because that person's granted an easement, are we just getting rid of setback issues altogether, and they can have docks 2 inches
That's a
apart?
great question, and I don't think that's, I'm not Mr. Mathis, but we're on me to make that determination. That's something that the easement grantor has to consider when they grant or not grant the easement. And it would be my assumption that that was considered. In other words, to your point of, suppose I decided I wanted to reconfigure my dock in a different direction, so now I'm going to veer much closer to, okay, well, that's a problem for you. And yes, it would be. But no, I don't think it's a really nilly thing, because solving a problem between those two property owners with that easement could, and in certain cases might, create a problem for the owner who granted the easement. Just like when you grant any easement, like for access and ingress, you can no longer use that piece or that portion of that piece just how you want to use it, because you've granted an easement.
And so that if that property owner that now allowed the construction of the dock, I'm sure, does the code say you can only have one dock per property? And so how does that work for the fact that now you've got 2 docks on one property potentially?
I don't know if it says that, but I would still argue the dock still belongs to to the appellee here or appellant here. And
I'm okay, I don't think I haven't heard that there's any huge objection to this. I just don't know that we fully baked the idea.
I think like any ordinance, it would be, if there was a hypothetical proposed new ordinance or amendment to the ordinance, it'd be great if it was review criteria for staff that allowed them to do that and allowed us to review it if necessary later, to determine whether, one of the considerations being whether or not that easement or easements, because presumably we've seen ones that affected more than one property owner, this is the case here. And then in those circumstances, it would have to be multiple easements to resolve the issues. So it would have to be drafted in a way that was clear that the easement or easements would have to eradicate the issues that otherwise exist. That would be ideal.
Just so the easement would say something like, the grantor understands and agrees that future permits for his dock shall not come within 10 feet of the dock that's built nearby.
something like that.
So, right, but I also think that one of the things to think about is that we don't have a larger picture, but I think it's because all of these lot lines are running to the center of the lake. Is that what it is?
Yeah, correct.
And so instead of,
Well,
is that not right? Or is that right?
If I may, the center of the lake is actually to the north. If for some reason they handle south.
Okay, so I think we have to draft an ordinance that somehow states that for purposes of granting a dock permit, you draw some sort of linear line off of the lot lines straight in order to define dock buildable areas, regardless of where the lot lines actually go. But I don't know if we can do that, because then you're, by code, allowing people to build in somebody else's technical property lines.
Littoral rights.
Yeah, so it gets complicated, but here's what I would suggest. I don't know that we have a problem, but I'm not sure that this idea is fully there yet. So I'm tempted to say, try to give us more on how to do this.
Perhaps I could shed a little bit of light on this in terms of the interpretation portion of the appeal. When city engineer was doing some research on this, these docks were clearly permitted based upon the littoral rights that were granted here. Lake Minnehaha, we're assuming, and it appears that was the case, was considered waters of the state at one time, as an navigable water of the state. So when these docks were permitted, they were permitted based upon the littoral rights that were established by the state, which allows you access to the water, views, things like that. When we asked if recently, over the last 2 or 3 years, the state increased the size of lakes they considered to be waters of the state, and so we were asking whether each individual lake within the city would be considered water of the state. The state came back and told us that Lake Minnehaha is not considered waters of the state, so that sort of took the littoral rights issue off the table and left us with our property line issue. If we're dealing with littoral rights here, we'd probably be looking at this differently because the state would be looking at it differently to permit the property owners to have access to the water based upon those rights, the rights to access, the right to use, and things like that, which becomes a different standard. So it appears that's what happened over the past, but now the state's claiming that, or not claiming that Lake Minnehaha is a water of the state now. So all of these is what is our code. So there has been a difference, a change in interpretation, clearly since these docks were originally permitted.
I think the issue just is, to me, and I think everybody, the other 2 council members today understand and agree, I think, is that the purpose of the appeal is to allow someone an outlet to correct an error of staff, and there is no error of staff here. The issue is our ordinance, or our land development code, and its application not being what we would desire in the circumstance, and there's just a different procedure to remedy that problem.
So I think it's a problem with the code, but it's a problem that the code doesn't have the flexibility to allow when you have lots that are strangely configured for practical purposes for building a dock. It just doesn't allow it. So how do we fix that? How do you reconcile that? I don't know.
Well, again, my answer is to put in some language that would allow, in many cases what you want, is particularly with these situations where the city's interest is covered if the property owners, sometimes on either side, sometimes only on one side, agree on a solution that doesn't create safety hazards or other issues for members of the public. So, for example, an easement wouldn't solve this issue if this was a dock that was going 200 feet out in the water and could cause a problem for a jet skier or a water skier or a wakeboarder or whatever the guys do these days, or fishermen or whatever to run into. And so then we'd have a compelling interest. But in this case, based on the presence of this dock, visually it looks like it's not nearly as long as some of the ones that are around. And with Jackson, it was a man-made lake, and it literally had a right angle, okay? This is a natural lake, but it almost has a right angle, and these problems are going to exist. And in every jurisdiction I've been in, including one Mark knows well about, is Mount Dora, they have a problem with boathouses with the setback issue because of the way the lot lines were drawn. They're come to a point where they're so narrow, everybody's got a boat dock, but nobody could get one today because they'd be on top of one another. But yet, when storms come and things happen, they got to get rebuilt. So it's not an unsolvable problem. It's not an unusual problem, particularly in Florida. And I think the answer is to create a mechanism where the department that oversees the issuance of the permits can take into consideration if the property owners have a solution that doesn't add to it a safety concern where the city would have a legitimate interest, like some of the things I mentioned, safety because of how large it extends into the water and the construction materials and the height and that sort of stuff. And if that's a workable solution, that's the kind of thing that can be done in an ordinance. It doesn't fix this today. It could fix it in the future, but you could also take, in my view, given what I see as the relatively minimal risk of any backlash, to say this is not the future as we planned it. This is not what we envisioned when we did this ordinance back in 2000 and, I think it was about 2000, 2001. And so it's been a long time before we've encountered another Lake Jackson-like situation. And the property owners, rather than getting a lawsuit, which is what happened there, have figured out a way to solve it themselves. So if we want to embrace that and then try to fix it going forward, I think there's a path to do that.
I have a position, and I'll just preface it before I make a motion, so that it's clear what my thought process is before that motion, but basically what Cliff said. But I do, for all the reasons I said before, think that it's in the best interest of the city and all people present and all the interested parties present to approve, I guess, reverse the decision of staff in this circumstance based on the new information, which I'll interpret the motion in that, in my motion as bringing a basis of newly discovered evidence, and also would like to do, going forward, whatever it is that's appropriate to request, whatever is in my power to request these proposed changes, because
proposed changes, and that's squarely what is in Mr. Mathis's department, which means it's going to end up in my desk. But that's the point, is that I think there's a path to get there.
right, because I don't see the purpose personally, pragmatically, to require these homeowners to go through that process and wait for us to do that, but I do think that there's a reason for us to do that. It's the second time something like this has come before us where we said maybe we should change that part of the code, so, or add to it, I suppose. So that being said, I'll make a motion to reverse the decision of staff based on everything I already said.
I'll second that, and I do think on the easement, I don't know how, I think that easement has to be clear what it's stating it's doing and the effect of having the dock and what that setback issues mean. And I think it should be clear in that easement what the impact is for each side.
So that's a second.
That's a second.
For the purposes of discussion, so let me discuss just a minute on that, because I was going to ask a detail or two about the easement. So I'm not sure, we've heard that the easement has been reviewed, but I haven't gotten that from staff, seen the easement or seen anything that looks like, are you all comfortable that you have an easement that's going to answer here?
I was told it was reviewed by Drew. I do not know the answer, and I don't want to claim that I do. I do know that at least it's to the limited issue of its effect when we put this in the code is if there's failings of the easement in some of the capacities that we talked about, the code will make it very clear that that's on the property owner.
So let me ask this of the property owner, if I could, or Mr. Schieberdecker, because they would have firsthand knowledge, or Dan might. So in the, Mr. Wu indicated that they were going to pay, the Wu's would pay for Schieferdecker's increased insurance issues with this. Is that something?
Let me go up and just speak here.
If you wouldn't mind, is that all right if we get a little more evidence on the record here? I was just wondering, my question really is the easement contingent upon that? And if they or their future homeowners quit paying, will the easement go away as well?
No, first of all, we are additionally insured, that's what we are, on their policy. I don't think it costs them anything, I don't believe that. You just put it, we asked for that to happen, and so they put it on their policy that we, up to $1.3 million, where we are basically additionally insured for any liabilities.
So this is not affecting your policies at all?
No.
Okay.
Not
All right, that was really my question. So is the easement on a going forward basis contingent upon additional insured, what if the future homeowners, subsequent homeowners, someday somebody else will live in the house, they quit, they don't carry that policy, does the easement, doesn't carry the easement at all? That's really more of a legal question, I guess.
Well, it addresses that. It says, that it runs with the land, as Cliff had said, that basically anybody that owns that house, that's a requirement, and when they go to buy the house, they'll have to, because we're going to record the easement, obviously, and so they'll know that that's a requirement requirement.
What if they don't?
Can I help here?
Yeah.
It's a different question, Mr. Chairman.
So I think, Howard, I think I did get you answered my question, certainly. I misunderstood. I thought that you all were going to have increased insurance rates, and I just wanted to make sure that that was, okay.
It's a valid question, which is what happens if the next
Yeah.
homeowner doesn't get it?
That's right. You can't force somebody to pay.
Yeah, that's the thing. Essentially, what you're being asked is whether the easement is contingent. If a new homeowner comes along and says, yeah, I'm not gonna get the insurance, then they still have the easement. That's important, because if they don't have the easement, then the dock becomes non-conforming.
Well, it says that the easement runs with the land, that's why, I mean, I'm not an attorney like you are, that can have that understanding, but we did put in there that it had to be, whoever bought their property would have to basically, would have to comply with the easement and do the insurance. Now, if they refuse to do it, obviously there would be a legal thing to work, I guess, to work through for us if we were still there, or whoever was in our house at the time too. I mean, they can probably, anybody can refuse to do anything.
And I think that would be the ultimate answer, Mayor. Based on that answer, I would assume that it would become an issue between the private property owners regarding the existence or non-existence of the easement. And if whoever, if Mr. Schieferdecker, whoever follows him in that residence, they get into a battle over it and the court says there's no more easement, then it becomes our issue regarding code enforcement.
That's where I'm getting to. So when counsel for the city determines whether or not this easement is good enough, we just have to make sure that it really does run with the land, regardless of any ancillary agreement.
That's where I was going, John, is that I'm not fully there on the easement.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. This has to be pretty clear what the, I think we're all saying practical purposes, go for it. But from a technicality standpoint, there's issues both with the ongoing enforcement of this, and then if the easement blows up because someone doesn't get insurance.
The question that I got asked by somebody, and it was his staff, so I'm not sure whether it was through Mark or something. But someone, I remember seeing a question, does the city need to be a party to the easement? And I don't know that I physically answered it, but in my head the answer is no. For very much reasons that I didn't want us to be drawn into a dispute between property owners as a party. But having said that, I have no issue going back and looking at the easement again. I'm sure it runs with the land. It may be contingent on the purchase of insurance. But if one party doesn't insure the property and the other party decides to make that an issue, that's still a private dispute until one of them wins. And then it becomes our issue regarding non-conformity.
Right, and for, in the easement, that can be made, they can be unmade tomorrow.
Yes.
Unless we have interest in it, perhaps. So maybe that's another thing to keep. So I guess the way I understand the motion in the second was that it is contingent upon city staff being satisfied that the easement answers all these concerns.
Yes, sir.
When Drew reviewed the easement, Drew reviewed the easement Thursday, and he said basically the same thing Cliff did. It's a private property issue, but all the city interests are covered in there. So he wasn't too concerned with it, but we will definitely take another look at it based on what we heard tonight.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're trying really hard not to be the lawyers, and I don't know how good of a job we're doing, but I think it is nice to put it in close hands, but we want to make sure so that we are remanding it with instructions, which is that assuming that it passes, staff, which includes Cliff and everybody's approval, then fine. If not, then I guess it'll be double denied and come back.
Right. I think that's the issue. We're not approving it. We're saying it's reversed.
You're conditioning
We're requiring the consideration of the newly discovered evidence to determine.
Right.
The easement's got to be good. I think that's what we're.
It would be reversed subject to staff approving an easement that addresses the concerns of council with an S plus council with a C.
Simple, right?
We just don't want to.
Got it.
Okay.
You didn't vote.
Didn't vote. Nope. We have a motion and a second. So
It will be reviewed and commented on to the extent necessary by me tomorrow.
Okay, great. Okay, well, then Laura, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Wild.
Aye.
Councilmember Wurzel. Aye. Mayor Lambert.
Aye. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Okay. We have, our next order of business is ordinance number 1423 regarding fire protection and prevention. Lori, would you please read the ordinance title?
Ordinance number 1423, an ordinance of the city of Maitland, Florida relating to fire prevention and amending the Maitland City Code, implementing the Florida Fire Prevention Code, adopting the Florida Fire Prevention Code by reference and reference provisions of nationally recognized codes, providing for the general regulation of fire prevention activities within the city of Maitland, re-adopting local technical amendments as prescribed by Florida statute, reorganizing sections to coordinate with Florida Fire Prevention Code, providing for clarifications of requirements regarding stand types, re-adopting fire sprinkler system requirements, re-adopting electronic monitoring requirements for fire sprinkler systems, providing for conflicts, providing for severability, providing for codification, providing for retroactive effective date.
Okay, thank you, Lori. And we have
Brandon Lawrence, our fire marshal, is that?
Thank you. Mr. Lawrence, would you like to introduce the?
Yeah,
the
sure.
community
Good
item?
evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Brandon Lawrence. I'm your fire marshal. I'll be very brief. The only changes that we're really making with our local ordinances is, as they stand now, is going from the 7th edition of the Florida Fire Prevention Code, which we're in now, to the 8th edition of the Florida Fire Prevention Code, which will be applicable on January 1st of 2024. So it's gone through a rigorous 3-year vetting process. The state adopted the 8th edition this past summer, and it'll be effective in a couple weeks. So in order to maintain the similarity with the state, we need to update our code references to reflect that. Happy to provide more context if you'd like, or any questions if you have any.
Okay, does anybody have any questions of Fire Marshal Lawrence? None. All right. Does anybody from the public like to address the Florida Fire Code? Okay, let's close the public comment period. Motion is over.
I move to introduce ordinance number 1423, amending and readopting the city code, chapter 6, fire protection and prevention, and set the public hearing date for January 8th, 2024.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Lori, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Wurzel. Aye. Councilmember Wild.
Aye.
Mayor Lambert.
Aye. Okay, thank you, Fire Marshal. Our next item is ordinance number 1424 regarding parks, recreation, boating in Fort Maitland Park. Where would you read the ordinance title, please?
Ordinance number 1424, an ordinance of the city of Maitland, Florida, amending the code of ordinances, chapter 11, parks, recreation, and boating, article 1 in general, modifying the hours of Fort Maitland Park, providing for conflicts, providing for severability, and providing for an effective date.
Okay. Let's see.
I'll take this one.
All right. Please do.
All right.
Very good.
At the October 9th meeting of this year, the City Council discussed a number of operational issues that related to Fort Maitland Park. One of those was its hours of operation. When we were discussing it, we brought up the fact that the hours of operation for Fort Maitland Park within the code extend beyond our normal hours of operation. They go from 6 in the morning till 11 p.m. when our typical operating hours are from 8 in the morning till 10 p.m. for the community park, which is the park that's open the longest. Other operating hours for non-secured facilities are dawn to dusk. So that's how that would typically work. So based upon those concerns regarding, and there were also concerns regarding overnight parking that had this brought up before discussion, City Council asked us to come back and recommend some changes to that to bring Fort Maitland Park into more consistency with the other park hours. So when we took a look at the code, what we found is that Fort Maitland was specifically the only park that was called out with its own individual park hours. Every other park in the city, as referenced in section 11.44, it says that parks are open to the public every day except for emergencies. Park hours for each park shall be posted. So you post each park hours depending on the type of park it is and when it's open. So instead of setting new park hours for Fort Maitland, what we're recommending is just to strike that section of the code and have Fort Maitland fall under park hours for everything else. We just post those park hours within that park to give notice of when it's going to be open and closed, so the public will know. Now, specifically, what we are proposing for Fort Maitland Park is that it would be open from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. That will allow park staff time to get in there. The first park staff get in at 6 a.m. to go to the community park, to get the community park ready for the day, then they go out and make their rounds and start opening parks. So opening it by 7 a.m. shouldn't be a problem. Closing it at 10 p.m. won't be a problem. It will be one of the last parks that's closed as they leave for the day. So that's what we're recommending. What operationally, how that's going to work is that if this ordinance is passed on second reading, we'll post one of our electronic message centers down there a month in advance to give the park users warning that there will be new park hours and the park will be being locked at night, so they'll have, at least they'll have notice that that will happen. Additionally, we're going to put a sign on on the exit gate, so if someone does get locked in, the police department has keys to all of our facilities, so we'll put the non-emergency number there, tell them to call the non-emergency number, dispatcher contact the supervisor, we'll get the key and let them out. So that's happened before in our parks. And then again, what we'll plan on doing is prior to Memorial Day and probably a little bit after Memorial Day, we'll then put the electronic message center out there again. That's when boating season starts. So it'll be a whole new crowd of folks who are coming to Fort Maitland for boating season as the weather warms, and you can go through the same process again. So we'll give that next group of people prior notice. So we're going to try to avoid having people getting trapped in the park. So with that, we recommend introduction of this ordinance. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you, Mark. That's very helpful. Does anybody have any questions of Mark? Would anybody from the public like to comment on park hours? Parks generally. Or hours too. Seeing none, let's close public comment period. And a motion would be in order.
I'll move to introduce ordinance number 1424, amending section 11.3, Fort Maitland Park's hours of operations and setting the public hearing for January 8th, 2024.
Second.
Okay. First and second. Call the roll.
Councilmember Wild?
Aye.
Councilmember Wurzel?
Aye.
Mayor Lam?
Aye. Okay, we're on to Lakes Advisory Board appointments. Lori, would you please introduce the item?
The Lakes Advisory Board has two vacancies as the terms of Ms. Cravan and Ms. Marston expire December 2023. Both have served 2 consecutive terms and therefore are eligible for reappointment at this time in accordance with the LAD Constitution, Section B. 3 residents seeking to be appointed, with the first choice, Paul Farmer. Third choice was Eddie Baird and Daisy Chappie. Their completed volunteer serve packets were included. I would like to note that Mr. Baird denoted on his application that he didn't agree with the boilerplate release and waiver within the city's electronic form. The city attorney was consulted on that and informed staff that Mr. Baird's refusal to be bound by the release exposes the city to liability. However, it's solely the council's decision to disqualify the applicant due to the refusal. And Ms. Chaffee indicated on her application that she wasn't a resident. She has been called and contacted, and she said she marked that an error. She didn't read the question appropriately. So her address has been verified, and she is a city resident.
Okay. So
2 appointments to serve 3-year terms beginning December 2023 and expiring December 2026.
all right. Before we get into it, let me just ask, because this might be important for our choices here. With regard to the waiver and the hold harmless, is there, I'm just wondering, is it common for cities to do that? For
It is.
serving on boards, and what type of liability does it expose us to?
Well, that's the hard part to say. So the first question, is it common? Yes, it's pretty common, for a lot of reasons. When you have people volunteering to serve and you want to be in a position where you're not going to be sued based on their service because they get in a spat with somebody on the board, somebody calls them a name, and they blame it on the city, et cetera, et cetera. You can fill in many possibilities of things that go wrong in human dynamics. So that's the reason. The second question that I was asked from a staff perspective, I think was actually, it's not worth to ask it, is it time that we review the release and see if it can be updated? And the answer is yes, and we are in fact doing that regarding cases that have come out since that thing was written so long ago, including, for example, the case against the UCF Athletic Association when the player died of sickle cell trait by overheating, and the case law that came out of that, and how specific you have to be protected by a release and so forth and so on. So that is also happening. But to the question of whether or not you want to continue to have the release language or not, that is obviously a decision for you all. The reason that I commented and would stand by it, because I don't get to make the policy, that the failure to properly complete the application, which would include signing off on the release language, would be disqualifying, is because we don't have the option of saying it's not disqualifying. Y'all do. And if you say, you know what, we're fine with it, okay. Put in simpler terms, most of the cities, if not all of them we represent, would want to be released from as many things as they could when it comes to using volunteer service.
I'll nominate Paul Palmer.
Because he's got no problem with it. All right.
It's his first choice, and
Yep. And that's how we feel about Paul Farmer.
What is the procedure we're using this time, since I get confused?
Let's,
I thought we just filled one seat at a time.
Yeah,
so I was just-
If you do one at a time, then you just do your
So
first,
do
second,
we
and third.
second what he's saying, or does he need a second?
well, there's only one for the, well, I guess for his seat, there's only one, well, that's not true. There.
I'll nominate Paul Palmer for seat A, or whatever seat it is.
That's fine, I didn't know if I had, like.
Yeah, and then I think the way you've been doing it before is I nominate him and then we vote.
First,
right?
second, third.
First, second.
Yeah,
So I second that.
okay. And I third. Okay.
I also think that based on what Cliff has said, I think there is a candidate that has not qualified. So I think we're left with one choice. So I think I talked to Mark now, and what I didn't know is if anyone spoke to the other candidate to make sure that sometimes people fill these things out because they want to be on X board, and because you have to fill out 3 choices, you get to the third and they just fill it out. If this candidate does in fact want to be on LAB, then I say yes, but we had some issues where we get people on and they like, now I actually want to be on Parks and Rec, but I filled it out. But if anyone's had conversations with the candidate to make sure that they are in fact interested on LAB and that their interest is just serving on the city board, then I would have no problem going there. But I don't know if anybody has that knowledge. Okay, she's okay.
She's excited that she's going up on.
Great.
agenda site.
And anyone have pronouncing that last name? Anyone want to help me? Chaffee. Is that right?
That's,
Daisy. Okay. I will put a nomination up for Miss Chaffee, and I don't, if that's an incorrect pronunciation.
I will second.
Okay, and I will third that choice.
I also think, for not tonight, on a later date, we talked about whether or not time limiting you out after 2 terms of 3 years is the best practice for some of these boards. We don't go to 3 or so.
Okay.
For another day.
All right. Okay. We're on to the next one, yes. performance evaluation. And this kind of puts us in an awkward position for a couple of reasons, but for procedurally, I think neither the clerk nor the manager want to be the proponent of their own item here, so probably would fall to me to say we're going to discuss the city clerk performance evaluation conversation. And we could also, we could wait until we have a fuller board, or we can do it tonight. And I've asked both the city clerk and city manager if they have a preference on that, and they didn't have a strong preference, but that we might have a strong preference. Does anybody have a preference on that? We'd like to have other people present for this discussion for
I'm okay proceeding, but I'm also, they gave their evaluation, so I don't know if it moves the decision, but I'm also happy to, if the decision is to put it off, I'm fine with that too, but
okay.
but I understand your point, John.
Yeah, I just didn't want
having other people here, but
Right. Yeah, okay, well, let's just go ahead then. We are empowered to do it. There's 3 of us, enough of us to do this. So the city clerk evaluation is anywhere between above average to excellent on all these. So that's quite a range. You're all doing a great job. It looks like everybody's very happy with it. I can tell you I'm very happy with all your work and the way you've addressed things and brought a positive attitude and a lot of good energy to the post. So I'm very happy that you're our clerk. And citizens are well served by your participation. So, but you can read my evaluation too. It says the same thing. Anybody else have any comments on, we'll take them one at a time, the city clerk performance? Anything you want to discuss?
I echo that, and I talked to Mark. This is awkward at best, this process, but I tried to get a sense from Mark about what percentage salary increase was appropriate and sort of where so if the rating here by all the city council came up to averages of 4.8 for the clerk, and what that equated to from Mark's perspective on other staff, if that was an exemplary, I don't know what the terminology we use, Mark, but that was obviously a very good review, and where would somebody in line in staff kind of fall with that? And I think Mark was saying somewhere in the 5-6% range is sort of that, if someone with, from a staff level, and obviously these are more senior staff people and whatever, but that seemed to be because I didn't want to, I'm trying not, we would lean on them to give us direction on what these percentages should be, and because they can't really give that, I was trying to extrapolate it from what they would do for the rest of staff, because obviously we want to keep everybody in line and not kind of go out of sync, is my opinion, from the general sense. So that was what I got from, for the people that we really like, are doing a great job, which I think the city clerk falls in that bucket, what would be the appropriate increase? And that was what I was trying to get at.
And I think that makes sense too, because when some of our payroll discussions or raise discussions in terms of budgeting earlier in the year, when we were talking about general staff, there was talk about merit increases of 5%, and I believe that we're within that.
It was, yeah, I mean, what Mark and I were saying, he was saying about 3% was the cost of living, and then for really great performers who was sort of an extra up to around 3%. And obviously, there's different pay ranges, and so that has different dynamics. But I think
it helps you to see you're not picking it out of a hat.
Exactly. We're not picking out a hat, and you want to stay uniform, which is that I don't think you want to set examples at the top that are different than what I think you want to stay consistent across the board, and you don't want to be an outlier, because you don't want to give them a huge increase and then somebody else on a percentage basis and wait a minute, why didn't I'm a superstar, I didn't get that. So I was trying to stay consistent with what's in for a valued, great employee, what is the,
We established we're all lawyers, not HR professionals.
yes. So that's my thought.
So Mark, I had, maybe you and I talked about this as well, and well, maybe you can tell me what are you all doing generally for the, across the board, and what are you all doing this year for the merit? And I thought it was less than that. I thought we were talking more like 2 and 3%.
You know, what we're looking at, this is the class and comp year, so it's a little bit different.
Right.
So we're treating things, we have to treat things a little bit differently. So we took a look at the grades and pay across all positions in the city. And as the class and comp study came out, you take a look at it across the entire depth and breadth of the city, the average is coming up around 3%, a little bit more than 3%. That's not to say everybody's getting 3%. Some people are right where they need to be. Some people are just under where they need to be. Some people are well under where they need to be, which we knew that would be occurring. So that's sort of across the board, that adjustment is going to be occurring. And on top of that, we have a 3% merit that we're looking at rolling out. But from a merit standpoint also, people can come into the range of the merit. If they're solid performers, the merit's 3%, then you can get slightly less. If you're a really good performer, you get 3. If you're an excellent performer, you can make some great strides, done great things in the position or for the organization, you can get up to, you can't get anything more than 6 because then that's a promotion. So it's kind of a weird year in flux here, but that's how we generally grade out when it comes to a year like a class and comp year. This year.
When you say that they can't get any more than 6, for example,
Regular.
is that that's 6% merit only, non-inclusive of any rate adjustments that occur?
No, that would be in addition.
In addition to,
Yeah, because we should.
theoretically, someone could get 9%.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I maybe misunderstood. I thought you discussed it was up to 3% for the merit increase, but you're saying it's up to 6?
Well, what we budget for, and because not every employee is a high performer. So if you're an average performer, you just show up to get your job done. That's merit, so you're getting less than the maximum merit. If you are excelling in your position and your department head or your supervisor, ultimately your department head agrees that you're excelling, you can go above that 3%. You have to write a report on it about what's happened, why that employee has excelled and what they've done, and to justify that additional increase. So it's not common, but it does occur. So
It's not common to get more than 3%.
Yes.
But, and then they have to write a report to get over 3%.
Yes.
An upward departure. So is it fair to say that most people get the 3% merit?
It varies.
Okay.
It varies.
And so does the dynamic change, the higher the salary goes? Because when you get a percentage of, $100,000 versus a percentage of $30,000, it's quite a big jump. And then you're going to jump exponentially on top of that.
I agree with that. Now, I had that conversation. So I was just going on a straight percentage, and then what that dollar amount equates to, it gets harder because I don't know what the deltas are, so I don't know what we're talking about. But I agree. I hear you.
Yeah. Okay. So, do we, and this is awkward for us, it's awkward for you, be having a public review of your, a public review, which is usually behind closed doors in the HR room otherwise, or with the manager, but we're doing it here because of the sunshine law, because we're transparent. So we're going to do it. So we feel the need that the city clerk has earned an increase, a merit increase, or a COLA increase, or however you'd like to take that on. First, let's do it. I say yes. I think Lori's brought on you got a raise last year at this point, and this year you would do it again. And I think each percentage point, more or less, I think is $900. Piece of grass, but I think that's about where we're at. So the 2% range would be an $1,800 raise, or 3% would be $27.
And are you talking about the merit component or the 3%? Which component are you talking about?
I was actually just
In general?
Just general, that's the numbers we're talking about, for the percentage point, what it equates to in dollars.
So in your conversations with Mark and anyone else, what do you think, given salary range and based on what we've done across the board, what do you think would be the right percentage based on what you've seen for for a 4.8 scaled employee? I'm just to try to keep it even, to try to keep it consistent. What are you thinking?
Well, I guess we could take it two elements. One is the cost of living, and the other is merit, right?
Right.
So, cost of living is certainly to be dealt with. We could say, 2% for that and 2% for merit, and then it's a 4% raise, and that's, comes out to what it is, and that's, I'll start there. See what people think.
I think that probably with this and in the next one too, in terms of the cost of living and the study, the class and comp, that one of the things that's different is how newly hired both of these professionals are, in the sense of the class and comp portion of it, that was recently theoretically incorporated into the market. Although I think some sort of cost of living increase, as you're suggesting, makes sense, probably every year, especially nowadays. But I don't think we probably have wide discrepancies as some of the staff members might because of that. So I think that I think that if I think certainly whatever is generally being done for people who are solid performers, it should definitely be done here based on the evaluation and my observations and my evaluation, which is all I can go on. Because I could specifically, I could do written findings if I had to, even though I know we don't have to in this circumstance. And so, but I'm not enough. So, in terms of, I do understand the idea of adjusting with percentages at a higher, at a higher level as well. So, I don't know if I answered the question. Perhaps mentioning it closer.
Yes.
So give us a percentage, and I guess we'll.
Because we are incorporating cost of living in this as well, right? Because we're just doing whatever the pay rate is going to be. Since we're the only ones that can do that. Right? So, I think I'd probably be more like a 5%.
Combined or?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So between a 4 and a 5.
But I mean, that's where I just put it.
Okay, that. Okay.
I'm sorry, I can go the other way.
No, I think we should stay, like I said, I think, John, you make good points about the scale when it becomes an increased, but I don't know where that equates without getting really deep between where the compensation landed versus what that percentage was across the board. So I'm having a harder time with that, and then also staying in line with what is the, part of what we did was to stay up with market average and things, so I think we're in the ballpark
I think
between
it's the
4 and 6%.
range overall that we're all struggling with. I don't really think, I think that if someone came to us and was like, this is the range you have to pick within, we'd all be near the top of that range, I think, based on what we're saying. So it's not really based on that so much as what.
Right. I'm just trying to stay consistent
Right.
with what staff did generally. That's what I was trying to do. That was my main, in questioning with Mark, I was just trying to stay consistent. That was what I was. And I think, Mark, you said, in general, it came up to maybe a little bit more, I don't know, I thought you said it was a little bit more than 5%.
Yep, that's the most you can go, yeah.
Yeah, so I think we're certainly in the range. I mean, I could certainly split the middle and just say 4.5. I mean, or we could go 5. I'm more in a 4.5, 5 person. 4.5 to make a compromise, because I think there's only 3 of us here tonight, so this is even a little bit awkwarder.
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Well, all right, so we have a motion. Do we want to make a motion
I'd like to know what I mean, where do you think, I mean, it sounds like, John, you dug into it and maybe got a little bit lower range, but, so I want to be consistent. So I think, I would have thought 5% before your points, so, but if you've made some valid points, so if you think it should be, again, I know you 100% think that they're great employees, so that's not it. I think we're all just trying to say, what's the right number for that great employee to stay consistent with what has been done for staff in general, right?
Right.
I think that's what we're all saying. So this is, we're not debating the quality here. We're all staying consistent. So
We do need unanimity on this.
I'm with you on that. That's why I don't want to flash out a motion without having feeling like we're all on the same page. So
Yeah, I could go, yeah, I hear what you're saying, Mike, and I'm sympathetic to what you're saying, Lori, so it sounds like we're between 4.5 and 5, so maybe
we're not talking about big dollar amounts. So this is just, I want to stay uniform. That's all. That's what I.
Okay, well, I'll make a motion based on the city clerk's average performance evaluation of 4.8 on a 5-point scale, that we move to approve a salary increase of 5% effective January 2024.
I'll second.
Motion is second. Lori, would you call the roll? You do have to participate in this part.
Councilmember Wurzel?
Aye.
Councilmember Wild?
Aye.
Mayor Dons?
Aye. Okay. Now we're doing the city manager performance evaluation and compensation, number 6 here. And it looks like, again, I'm very happy with our city manager. I think, your evaluation is just like Lori's, 4.8 on a 5-point scale. I mean, I think you do excellent work, outstanding work. The city's in good hands. We're comfortable with you being at the helm, and for all the city is really largely in your hands, and the staff that you recruit and maintain and keep happy. And so, you set the tone for a lot of this. So, and you have recruited and maintained a great senior staff, and I think that morale echoes down through the rest of the staff as well. So I'm very happy with Mr. Regertine as our city manager, and I think everybody else is as well. I don't know if you'll speak to that. Does anybody have any questions of me on this? I'm just reading my script. So this is, I guess Mark has been on since, is it April? The city manager? Okay, so we have less than a year to deal with your raise, or compensation acceleration, whatever you want to call it. And I do have more background on this than I have on the others, because I did dig into the compensation of the market generally, of the local cities around. And when we were this is back 8 months ago when we were coming up with your salary. And so we got pretty deeply into that, and I think that my sense was that you are on the scale of local municipal city managers, you are on the higher end of, in my opinion, of how that all, and I'm glad it is, because we want somebody who's highly valued and highly compensated and highly motivated, and we want to keep them. But, so I have fresher eyes on what the market was at that point. I guess for the rest of the staff, you all have gone through this complicated class comp study going on for a long time, and to define what the market is for all the different positions in the city. So, in my mind, the class comp thing, I'm comfortable with what the research that I did, just because I looked up everybody's income on these. So the class and comp wouldn't move me on that very much. It probably wouldn't move the needle on, I don't know if it addressed your salary at all. It was
No.
probably outside the scale of that.
This is specifically decision from city council.
Right. So, that said, there is a merit increase to deal with, I think. And, I think that you've done a great job, and it's been, I don't think there was any doubt in anybody's mind when we hired you, that you were the right person for the job. And so I don't know how we deal with the roughly 3/4 of the year that we brought you on as a full-time city manager, or as a full city manager rather than interim. Does anybody have any ideas about how that might work? What we want to do as far as compensation on raise on that aspect of it? We dealt with this 8 months ago for Mark. We didn't deal with this 8 months ago for Laura, and we dealt with it 12 months ago for Laura. So really, we're starting to move on there.
For what it's worth, you were the only one that broke it down when we were talking about Lori's earlier in terms of cost of living versus merit, and you were at that point 2 and 2. So I was keeping in my mind behind my original motion that we voted on was cost of living 2, merit 3, when we ultimately did 5. That's what my intention was. Given that, I think it makes sense. I'm not sure that cost of living necessarily makes sense here for the reasons you're saying. But I think merit, otherwise they're exactly the same in the sense that it's 4.8. That part's exactly the same. Obviously, the cost of living in terms of when the salary was originally negotiated, which is what you're pointing out, is different, and where we are on the salary scale is different, which we did consider somewhat in the clerks as opposed to general staff. And so this is ahead significantly of the clerk position in terms of salary. So I think it would make sense to land more at like a 3 for those reasons, but as an acknowledgement of merit.
Okay. Mr. Wild,
I'm with you, and I was just giving maybe a little bit more to the cost of living, just giving some. Things have gotten, the cost of living has gone up, so even if, I understand, and John, you made a lot of good point, I would probably have given some adjustment there, maybe not the full 3% or whatever, but I would have probably said at least percent on that, but that would just have been my, if not, maybe even a little bit more, but that would have been my thought.
right. Okay. So one thing about the cost of living, I guess, is it's pretty much the same for a lot of people across the board. That's how they live, right? So much food you can buy, so much gas you can get, and that kind of. So it's kind of inelastic at that point to some degree. And when you get to the higher compensation levels, is it better to look at raw dollars rather than a percentage, or is a percentage also appropriate for the larger, you know what I'm saying? So I guess what I'm saying is we don't necessarily have to do this by percentages. We could do it by raw dollar amount. We're going to do that too. We felt that was fair, but I'm just throwing that out there. It also complicates things and then complicates the whole recipe here.
I think it makes sense as a percentage when you're like closer to the poverty line essentially, or things like that, and people's standard of living adjusted in order to maintain the same standard of living, you spend more. I guess is the idea of why it's a percentage, but I just thought, I think part of it too, and this the same when I used to grade papers, is once you start, and we were talking about consistency earlier, comparing everything in my mind to like also a scale of what we just did on the last vote. So I tried to articulate what it was comprised of, but I also just think it makes sense in comparison to what we just did, like a 3 versus a 5. All of the factors considered, even though I tried to articulate a logical basis, some of it's just a feel, comparatively, if that makes sense. But I'm also not going to, again, I think we're in the same position where we all agree that any increase is well deserved, so.
Okay. Somebody want to?
So where were you, John? Where, it sounds like Lori and I are maybe around 3 or 4, me on the higher side. But again, that means nothing. With we 100% think they're worth every raise, but where do you land on that?
Yeah. Well, because when you get to the higher end, but you just by attaching a percentage point to it, I think you end up kind of skewing a lot. So I would be 3 would be about where I would think. Because it ends up being a fair number in raw numbers, especially given that we have just gone through this 8 months ago. But I can.
All right, I will. What's the motion? I closed it up already because I was already being optimistic. I'm just not going to throw out a raw percent because that seems. So I would say that. Based on the city manager's average performance evaluation score of 4.8 on a 5-point scale, we move to approve a salary increase of 3.5% effective January 2024.
I'll second.
Okay, and I will third. Okay, so we have it. I believe that is. You have your performance evaluation and compensation taken care of for the city manager and the city clerk. We need to vote on that?
Yes, please.
Another official vote. Laura, would call the roll.
Councilmember Worcel. Aye. Councilmember Wild.
Aye.
Mayor Lund.
Aye. Okay. Great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Reports, Mr. City Attorney.
I have nothing as of yet. But the new year will bring more, I promise.
All right. Are you good with
It depends on the friends in Tallahassee.
it? All right.
I've heard plans that are not exciting.
All right. Mr. City Manager?
Just a few things. First of all, thank you very much for that. Next year can't be long enough away. But on that note, really the pleasure's all mine to be your city manager. And I've talked to a few of you about this, but I wanted to talk to you all together. But I have to talk specifically to Lindsay and Vance about this. Sort of an example of what makes this city council the best city council that I've ever seen or worked with in my over 30 years of experience is an example of what happened during the library debate at the last council meeting about how we were going to fund the library. I knew walking into that meeting that there were very divergent opinions and it was going to be a challenge. and I felt like I might have to work hard to facilitate to get to the point where the decision was made. As you might recall, I sat there quietly for most of the meeting. You guys worked it out amongst yourselves. There were differences of opinion. You work through them, you talk through them. Everybody's very respectful of each other, and that just is an example of things that don't happen in other local governments. We're very fortunate to have the group of people we have here, my elected officials, you guys, and the way you work with each other, work with me, work with Lori, work with the department heads. We're in a very good place right now, and I appreciate that, so thank you for that. It really makes a difference. Secondly, it's not just me. It's people in the back of the room. They're not even all here today. Nobody does this alone. This is a hard job. It's hard for me. It's hard for them. It takes a lot of time. We put a lot of time in because we all love what we do. We love what we do in each individual department. I love doing what I do, help pull things together. But without them, I'm not anything. So, you know, a lot of thanks goes to them and what they do. So I want to let you guys know it means a lot to me. So that's all I have.
Okay, thank you.
Man, he's hard to follow. No, I do want to say thank you. And my 2 years here in Central Florida have flown by. We love where we live here, and it really is a joy to come work in the city. On another note, in case any of you missed the memo, at the end of qualifying, Mayor Lowndes was the only one that qualified, so he qualified unopposed. There will not be an election. We just officially, per the charter, he is declared elected, and he will sit in his seat from 2024 until 2027. 3 more years.
Thanks, thank you, yeah. Hold on, hearing that, I'll take it over.
I'm sorry.
Well, thank you.
And happy 60th birthday.
Oh.
For anyone that didn't know, Mayor has turned 60, so.
Right.
That
For all you who
was supposed to
celebrate.
be recorded, I think.
Yeah. Didn't have to say a number.
Oh.
But you did, there we go.
It's all right, the big one.
Yeah, I appreciate it, thank you, I appreciate that. Mike, anything?
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
And congrats on another 3 years.
No, thank you.
Well deserved.
Lori?
Yeah, ditto to all that, and thanks to all the people in the room and otherwise who started all of our holiday festivities that my family and all families enjoy. The Grinch and the Santa Claus and the Maitland City of the Season of Lights. The fireworks are really extra special, I would say. So, thank you.
Thanks to Chief Morton for bringing Santa, that was very nice. And then, I guess, Chief Manuel for squiring Santa around through all the neighborhoods on Saturday. Yes. And tomorrow, I guess, is the
Yes.
holiday luncheon for staff?
Yes, we hope you all can make it.
Okay. So,
I know that Councilmember Wurzel, Councilmember Wild, and Councilmember Guthrie, who's absent tonight, have all agreed to express that they'll be there. So we hope you can join us.
okay.
No pressure.
Okay.
That was pressure. I think that was the definition
not
of pressure.
Yeah, okay. All right, I think that's it then. Thank you. We'll stand adjourned.